I now have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Irma Patricia Espinosa Hernandez from Mexico. Dr. Hernandez is a psychiatrist who specializes in criminal psychology. She's a member of the SEPROME Latinoamericana Council. She's also the coordinator of SEPROME Psychodiagnostics and Clinical Evaluation, a member of the National Child Protection Council of the Mexican Episcopal Conference, and she's also the secretary of the academic section of spirituality and psychiatry of the Psychiatric Association of Latin America for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean region. Dr. Hernandez.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon for everyone. First of all, I want to thank God for allowing us to be gathered in this place, even pandemic. In second place, I want to thank the members of the organizing committee for the invitation and the vote of confidence. Tina Campbell, Dr. Solner, Alessandra Ocampo, Andrew Asopardi, and to the wonderful Silvia Gaudosi, yes, who for some of us has been a kind of guardian angel. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues and friends, Larry, thanks for your presentation. And considering the subject of our Congress reporting abuse, obligations, dilemmas, and reality, when I read Larry's presentations, I consider the need to talk about the issue of re-victimization as part of the vicissitudes that happen to the victims of sexual abuse who decide to report. I want to start with a quote of an Uruguayan writer, Jorge Macfut, that says, "In a society of saints, demons are very frequent exceptions. It happens everywhere in our world. In church, it's not the exception." All of us know that the nature of sexual abuse is a power abuse, an exercise of control and domination in an asymmetric relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, surrounded by silence, concealment, and complicity, and perpetrated by different circumstances: the own culture, the system, the institutions, the family, and the victim's vulnerability. Every culture, the culture of violence, the culture of abuse, structure, organize, legitimize, and self-protected for what? To create a type of relationship for winners and losers. The aftermath of the sexual abuse, everybody knows, depends on the type of abuse, the frequency and duration, the relationship with the aggressor, the use of force, and the sense of damage that the victim has about the crime. But there's another consequence during the report procedure: re-victimization. I'm going to talk some about an example, the Mexican legal system, because I came from this country. The Mexican Federal Penal Code has a classification of sexual offenses. The name is Crimes Against Sexual Freedom and Safety and Normal Psychosexual Development. It's well done classified. Even we have a general victims law since 2013, which principle is this: each stage of the victim's complaint process generates specific needs and is the state that must guarantee that the attention, care, and assistance services reach the victim. Article 5 of this victim's law recognition of the victim as holder and subject of rights. Presumption of their good faith and the non-criminalization or responsibility of their situation. A comprehensive and diligent care, and a differential and specialized approach. It means it's not the victim, it's a victim. If we talk about the principle of no criminalization, the authorities should not aggravate the suffering of the victim or treat her in any case as a suspect or responsible for the commission of the facts denounced. This means that we have to protect the victim from the re-victimization or secondary victimization. But, as we know, theory is very different to practice, okay? Because in my country, at least 70% of the victims feel violated during the process. Why? First of all, the staff lacks specialized expertise without basic or advanced training. In my country, if you want to punish any official worker, any police worker, you send him or send her to the Department of Sexual Offenses. It's a punishment. So nobody says, I want to work there. And that's why they have no expertise at all. So they lack a humanitarian and humanistic vision that allow them to be kind and consider the physical and emotional needs of the victims. This results in these terrible statistics. In my country, the allegations of sexual abuse in children and adolescents is like this. For every 1,000 cases, only 100 are reported, 10%. Of those 100 cases, 10 cases go to trial, just 10%. And of those 10 cases, only one achieves conviction, another 10%. This means that the effectiveness of the Mexican legal system is 0.1%. One case in 1,000 cases. That's why, if you remember the first image I said, as angels watch, wicked demons become frequent exceptions. Because everything, like a perfect storm, goes against the victims. Why? Because the only testimony comes from the victim. The objective and subjective properties of the events make them difficult to trace for forensic experts, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, police investigators, or criminologists. That's why sexual crimes are hidden, and so they are difficult to prove this kind of crimes. But as Carl Sagan said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And we have to keep in mind every day this kind of certainty. Dr. Jose Vaca Cortez is a criminal psychologist from Mexico, says, the intimacy of the act, the absence of witnesses, the shame before the complaint, the pain of accusing a family member or acquaintances, the feelings of awkwardness. All these make these crimes have high rates of criminal sub-registration. So the numbers we know come from sources such as health services or legal complaints. In my country, we have 14 different penal codes, yeah, and 20 different definitions of sexual abuse. So it's an open door for everything that the defenders of the abusers can do against the victims. The information becomes scarce and fragmented and does not reflect all the cases that occur. Why do the victims do not speak? The victims do not speak because they are afraid of what? Of reprisals, of being blamed, of not being believed, shame, being subjected to other types of humiliation, discrimination, because the cultural charge towards victims. It's a stigmatization to be a victim of sexual abuse in almost parts of the planet. So the big question for every victim is, like the Shakespearean, to be or not to be. This is to report or not to report. And the victim could say, yes, but why? Or no, why not? There are interpersonal and extrapersonal factors that leads to a victim to say, yes, I denounce. The personal factors are feeling or being emotionally ready, a positive self-assessment, the damage suffered, the economic independence from the family that many times push not to denounce because they are going to be an aggression for the family if they denounce, and the tranquility of the victim. But there are interpersonal and social factors like protection of future victims. In our country and many other countries of Latin America, the first reason that many of the victims don't want to denounce is, or don't want to cause to the priest is, I don't want that you go to the civil authorities, I don't want to make a civil denounce, I just want to protect future victims. We don't want that this priest make the same thing to other people. The social awareness, the awareness of the abuser, and the success expectations. There are another group of factors that are related to the perpetrator. Punish the abuser, awareness of the abuser, point out or unmask the abuser, to get distance from the abuser, and finally stop the abuse. But there is a lot of victims that they say, I do not denounce. You know that it takes between 10 to 21 to 25 years to open the secret. And that's why I want to quote Dr. Rafael Romero. He's another criminalist of Mexico. And he says, the time that passes is the truth that flies. And this is a very important reason. That's why many victims don't want to denounce. What factors are these? The lack of meaning. Many victims says, what's the point? Happened too many years ago. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I overreact. What's the point? That's a lack of meaning for many of them. The repression of memories or a state of confusion. We know that for the victims, there has no sense of what happened to them. And in many cases, they never realize what happened to them. There are still a confusion. Feel unprepared. Ignorance of the justice system, or, as in my country, they know the system. Family ties, fear of being judged, lack of family support in the complaint, distrust of the system, or prescription. Marchiori, in 2012, made a review of 200 documents about complaints of the victims and found 6 main complaints from the victims during the report: dispersonalization, blame, lack of credibility, lack of information, prejudice about re-victimization, and inadequate spaces. I'm just going to quote some phrases of victims that we can understand what mean every of these 6 main complaints. Dispersonalization. A victim say, "The worst violin was when the person who took my statement told me, 'You're rapist,' as if he were a friend or a partner." Blame. People look at you as if being a woman was a fault. Lack of credibility. This is the testimony of a mother of a 10-year-old boy who was abused by a priest. It seems that they are looking for the light instead of the truth. The doctor told me to invent more things because with the little bit that the abuser had done to my son, the police were not going to put him in prison. Lack of information. This is a victim that is going to an evaluation, but she didn't know that she's going to do it. Nobody told me that they were going to do a psychological evaluation. They said I was going to be given psychological help. That's a re-victimization. That's a lie. Prejudice about victimization. A victim says about women, an officer woman, a female officer that says, "Oh, poor girl, women are vulnerable. You shouldn't live alone. The same thing can happen to you now as a teenager." And unpleasant facilities. This is a phrase of a victim. It was like a kind of dark and airless basement where the statement took me, an undignified place. It's not even healthy for those who work there. Everything counts when we listen to a victim. Everything counts, any detail. Marchiori says, perhaps the greatest evil is to end people's hope due to acts or omissions. This is the foundation of re-victimization. So, do you remember that image and when we talk about the nature of sexual abuse? It's a power abuse, an exercise of control and domination in an asymmetric relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, surrounded by silence, concealment, and complicity, perpetrated by different circumstances, culture, system, institutions, family, and the victim's vulnerability. But when we talk about the nature of re-victimization, it's the same thing, the very same thing. It's a power abuse, it's an exercise of control and domination in an asymmetric relationship, but here is between the victim and the institutions called the family, the state, or the church. Surrounded by silence, concealment, and complicity, perpetrated by different circumstances, culture, system, institutions, family, and the victim's vulnerability. That's why I want to tell everybody, viewing, to hear. Not everything is to denounce. The victims need a prior process of emotional and spiritual recovery before being able to face the possibility of filing a complaint. They last between, as we said, 10 years to 25 years to open the secret. Understanding the inner process of a victim can only be achieved through listening. Listening, really listening. The Shema Israel with a real empathy. I want to make a necessary quote. Pepa Horno Goicochea, one of the experts of this subject, says, if the sexual abuse could not be prevented, society and institutions that represent it are obliged to offer the victims quality resource for their recovery and recognize the right to live that wound as they can, know, or want, without establishing limits of time, not forms. As a society, we owe them public recognition and the guarantee of a quality recovery process and everything necessary to prevent and eradicate sexual abuse. A personal conclusion. Every effort that church makes in favor of the victims should always be with an eye on the person who has been violated in the depths of its person, in a stage of its life where everything was possible and where the abusive act disrupted its path, but who is likely to receive help to be able to heal. Everything that is done, no matter how laudable it may seem, but does not have that objective above all else, will not honor the pain of the victims. So, if we do not really recognize the victims, if we do not listen to the victims, each victim, if we do not respond with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, all our strength, we will just be pretending. We will just be creating a farce for the public we want to impress. We will just be trying to clear our consciousness and play that we are saints. If we only do that, sooner or later, the Platonic sentence will reverberate within us. The masterpiece of injustice is to appear fair without being so. Thank you very much.